بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Today is our fifth online recorded lecture, and in this lecture we will start a new topic, which is public expenditure or government expenditure. As you know, in the previous four lectures we talked about public revenues, and we paid a great attention to the taxation as the main source of public revenues. So today we'll cover the public expenditure topic, but before talking about the learning outcomes of this lecture, let me remind you of some basic information that we discussed in chapter 1. In chapter 1 we talked about the difference between government transfers and government purchases, and we also distinguished between pure command and mixed economy. Concerning the mixed economies, they have large government sectors that supply public services such as national defense, police and fire protection, and so on. Also, government provide income support for poor, and as you know, the size of the government is usually measured as a percentage of public expenditure to GDP, as we have explained earlier. And this percentage, it changes or varies among countries. And if you remember, we said that in most modern industries nations, government expenditure accounts for between 25 to 50% of GDP. So the public expenditure issue has great importance in evaluating the performance of governments, as we explained in chapter 1. So in today's lecture, we will cover the following points. We start by defining public expenditure, and then we distinguish between the economic and sector classifications of government expenditure, and then we will identify the main components of economic classification. Now let's start with the first point, which is the definition of public spending. Well, we can define it as spending made by the government of a country on public or collective needs and wants, such as defense, fire protection, pensions, unemployment compensation, income support for poor, and so on. And in general, government expenditure are computed as the sum of government consumption, government transfer payments, and gross government investment. Now let's move to second point of the lecture, which is the classification of public expenditure. Well, in this regard, we have two categories, which are the economic classification and the sector classification. Concerning the economic classification of public expenditure, it's highly essential to classify the different items of public expenditure according to the use or the purpose of the spending. This means that we would understand the aim of this spending. For example, are these funds will be used to purchase new goods or to pay for wages, or will be used to transfer to unemployed people, or will be used to subsidize certain commodities such as bread or petrol products, and so on. So in this case, we call it the economic classification of public expenditure, and in this lecture we will discuss this classification in more details. On the other hand, the second type of public spending classification is the sector classification, and in this classification we are interested in classifying government expenditure to different sectors of the economy, such as health, education, and defense. So this type of classification provides us with indicators of the relative importance of this sector from government point of view, as we will discuss next week. Now let's explain the economic classification of public expenditure, and as I said, this classification focuses on the use or the purpose of spending, and generally government uses its funds to pay for wages or interest payments, or to purchase goods and services, and so on. According to government financial statistics, economic classification of government spending consists of 8 classes or categories as shown on the figure. So these categories are compensation to employees, use of goods or purchases of goods and services, consumption of fixed capital, interest payments, subsidies, grants, social benefits, and other expenses. In the rest of this lecture, we will explain the difference between these classes or categories in more detail. Well, the first category in the economic classification of public expenditure is compensation to employees. What does this mean? It means, or it includes, any payments received by employees in return for the work done. And these payments may be paid in terms of cash or in kind. So this item includes wages and salaries and social insurance contribution made by a general government unit on behalf of its employees, as shown in the figure, and as will be explained in the next slide. Now let's discuss the four subcategories of compensation to employees. First, wages and salaries are divided into wages and salaries in cash and in kind. For wages and salaries in cash, they are the amounts payable in cash or any other means of payments to employees for the work they perform. Concerning wages and salaries in kind, they consist of goods and services that are provided for free or at lowered prices by firms or employers, and these goods and services are consumed by the employees to satisfy their own needs. This also includes any other benefits such as housing or accommodation services at reduced prices, transportation to and from work, nurseries for the children of employees, and services of vehicles or any other durable goods provided for the personal use of employees. Concerning the social insurance contributions, they are divided into two parts, which are actual and imputed social contributions. What are the similarities and the differences between these types of payments? These payments are similar as they include the payments paid by employers or firms against social risks or needs such as work injury, death, retirement, and of course, these payments are paid for the sake of employees. However, the difference between these types is that for the actual employer social contribution, these payments are paid through an intermediate institution such as the insurance company. On the other hand, for the imputed employer social contribution, these payments are paid directly from firms to employees without the involvement of intermediate institutions such as the insurance enterprise or pension funds. Second category of economic classification of public expenditure is the use of goods and services, where this item includes the total values of government purchases of goods and services, where these commodities are used in the production process or in the providing of goods and services, public goods and services, of course. And examples of these commodities includes raw materials, water and electricity, oil and other energy products, maintenance expenses for machines and equipments for roads, and also expenses of printing school textbooks and purchasing copyrights, and transportation costs. The third category of economic classification of public expenditure is the consumption of fixed capital, which is the decline in the value of the stock of fixed assets during the accounting period as a result of physical deterioration or normal oldness and typical accidental damage. And the fourth type or the fourth category is interest. Concerning interest, we discussed the public debt last week, and we talked about the public debt finance of government activities, where government borrows to finance its activities through issuing bonds or any other form of indebtedness. And as I said last time, Government should pay interest to investors who purchase these bonds. So when government pays the interest payments, it will be recorded as an expense from the government point of view. This item includes domestic interest payments, foreign interest payments, and any other expenses related to the public debt service, such as the fees associated with the financing arrangements, as we explained last week. The fifth type of economic classification of government spending is subsidies, which are the current transfers from government units to enterprises and households. Usually, consumer's subsidy is computed as the difference between the cost of the product and the price actually paid by consumer, where this difference is paid by government to the producers. And usually, this subsidy is provided according to household income levels. For example, if the cost of the commodity, such as the rice, is 10 pounds per kilogram, then for low-income households, they can purchase it as at 7 pounds. This means that government provides them with a 3 pound subsidy for each unit purchased. Concerning household subsidies, they are mainly in the form of food subsidies and energy subsidies. On the other hand, if we talk about subsidies to enterprises, they may be paid based on their production level or the level of imports and exports. And usually, these subsidies provide the required inputs for the production process at lower prices. And of course, this will lead to reducing the cost of production until the product is sold at a price less than its real cost. So subsidies to enterprises include energy subsidies and export subsidies, of course. For example, as you can see in the provided news headline, last month the Egyptian government decided to give industrial institutions low energy prices in an attempt to overcome the adverse consequences of the spread of coronavirus on the domestic industry. Now let's talk about the subsidy system in Egypt in more details. Looking at the subsidy system in Egypt, we can find that food and energy have been considered as the core of comprehensive scheme of public subsidies for decades. So if you look at this figure, we can find that the sum of energy and food subsidies represented more than 80% of total subsidies in the fiscal year 2011-2012. For this reason, the Egyptian government planned to rationalize the subsidy bill through the gradual decrease of undirected in-kind support, especially the energy subsidy. So it started a comprehensive reform of the energy sector in 2014, where this program is implemented through the adoption of subsidy cut to energy sector. As a result of this, we can see that the ratio of energy subsidies to total subsidies declined from 64% in 2011-2012 to only 33% in 2018-2019 fiscal year. So according to the energy subsidy reform, the Egyptian government increased energy subsidies for both households and for commercial uses. Also, the government introduced smart cards to control the electricity consumption, and it raised electricity and oil tariffs. For example, electricity tariffs were raised by about 40% in July 2016, and then we had another raise in July 2017 and this raise was 40%. And also we have another increase in July 2018. Also in June 2018, government raised oil prices by around 44% for oil products. Well, if we look at other types of government subsidies, we can see that we have an increase in the ratio of food subsidies from 20% to 27%, and also we have an increase in cash subsidies from 2% to 6%, and this is considered as a part of expenditure reform, and this expenditure reform aims at providing direct cash subsidies to poor and low-income people instead of indirect subsidies to a particular commodity or service, such as subsidies to food and energy. Concerning other subsidies, they include export subsidies, public transportation subsidies, health insurance and medicines, and we can see that we have an increase in other subsidies from 10 to 12%. This percentage is even expected to increase due to the requirement of financing of the Unified and Comprehensive Health Insurance Law that took place in this year. Now, concerning the sixth type of economic classification of government expenditure, which is grants. Grants could be defined as non-compulsory or optional transfer in the form of cash or in kind, and these funds are paid to another government or another international organization. So as we can see in this picture, in August 2019, Egyptian and US governments signed a grant agreement worth of $60 million. And this grant aims to help the Egyptian government in 6 main sectors, which are 1. Higher education, 2. Science, 3. Technology, 4. Health, 5. Trade, and 6. Investment. The funds in this grant should be spent on health improvement, especially improving Egypt's current family planning and reproductive health program. Also, a part of this grant should be spent on creating an educated workforce that meets the needs of labor market, and also a part should be used to increase employment opportunities for university graduates, and also a part of this grant should be used in enhancing scientific and technological cooperation for peaceful purposes and exchange ideas, information, skills, and techniques of any interests between the two countries. If you need more details about this agreement, you can navigate to the provided link. Well, now let's talk about social benefit, which is the 7th category according to the economic classification of government spending. What is social benefits? They are current transfers to households to provide for needs because of sickness, unemployment, retirement, and so on. And these benefits may be paid in cash or in kind, and include pension funds and social security pensions and other social transfers, such as Takaful and Karama cash transfer programs. This program was initiated in 2015 by the Ministry of Social Protection and provides transfers to many categories, including family transfer, child transfers, women, disabled, young people, according to some conditions, of course. If you need more details about the objectives of this program, you can navigate to the provided link. If we look at this graph, we can see that during the period 2015-2017, the cash transfer of Takaful and Karama program increased from £508 million to £9,316 million between 2015 and 2017. Then the final class or category of economic classification of public expenditure is called other expenses, and this item includes all expenses that are not classified in the previous 7 categories, and these expenses include taxes, fines, and penalties imposed by one government on another government unit, and also current transfers to non-profit institutions serving households. Now this table shows us the changes of the values of different categories of economic classification of public spending during the period 2015 to 2020, where the values of the financial year 2019-2020 are from the draft budget, and of course these are not actual values. You can just have a look on this table to trace the changes between different years. As I said in the beginning of the lecture, we can use this classification to evaluate the relative importance of each category from government point of view. So here we can compare the relative importance of different items of economic classification between 2 financial years, which are 2015-2016 and the draft budget of 2019-2020. So here, as you can see, we get the sum of subsidies, grants, and social benefits together because they are considered as the transfers. As we can see in the pie chart, the most important groups are interest payments, and then subsidies, grants, and social benefits, and then compensation to employees. The reason behind the significant share of interest is that in the previous years, the Egyptian government has initiated many mega projects that were financed by public debt. If we look at compensation to employees, we can see that government continued the effective implementation of the civil service law that links wages to the performance. As we can see in this chart, compensation to employees was planned to be increased from 19% to 22%. The reason behind this increase is the increase in the minimum wage from £1,200 per month to £2,000 per month. Also, government increased the minimum pension up to £900 per month during this year. So now we will stop at this point, and next week inshallah we will talk about the second type of public expenditure classification, which is the function or sector classification. So goodbye for now, and good luck with your study.